So, good morning to our Israeli colleagues. This is Bill Andrews here, and I thought I would set up an example to demonstrate to you about how you could use risk as a primary measure and how you would be able to identify risk within the system. So, we've set up somebody here to log in with, and if I just get the username correct, okay. And you can see how the message system works. Now, obviously, this is a first point that if you have somebody who's a supervisor of a group and has the ability to write messages at managerial level, they can present messages. So, for example, if there's somebody who's monitoring risk in a group of practitioners, they can send an alert, send a message from here, which will bring attention to that for the treating practitioner. We can see that this practitioner, Ellen Andrews, has two cases in here, and I've called the case that I want to demonstrate to you Riskdemo. Now, the first thing you can notice here straight away is that the primary measure for Riskdemo is the risk measure, and you can see straight away on this client list now that this is red. So it's immediately bringing attention to the fact as soon as Ellen Andrews logs in that this client is at risk. Now, if we go to the actual client themselves, what we see here, already knowing this client is at risk, is we can see the risk scores over here have not come down at all. By going to the charts then, we can look at the total picture of everything that's going on for this client according to the measures that have been used. Down here on the left side, we can see up at the top here, we've got risk, and we can see that that's still red. And we can see there's been a slight change on the GAD7 and PHQ9 and no change on the problems. As we go to look at the individual particular measures, we can refresh over here and we can see that the cutoff for the risk questionnaire that we've used here, 32 maximum, is very, very low, as you would expect a risk questionnaire to be, and you can see that the client is well above risk. So very simply, you can see how in this case that the risk can be actually used. Now, if we look at this other case here on our client list, you can see this Ellen case 1. Now, the primary measure in use here is the GAD7. Now, in a case where risk is not an identifiable item, it could be that at the very first session, in the profile of the case, that you have chosen down here the the GAD7 as your primary measure. But you see, the primary measure could have been the risk measure. And if that had been chosen for this case, then that would be the one that demonstrates at that point. So at any later point, you can choose what is going to be your primary measure. So for example, after assessment, if you've identified the fact that risk is not an issue at all, you can simply return to the client's profile and now decide to configure a different measure as the one that you're going to display. And that would usually and sensibly be the measure that is the most clinical, is the most distressed, because that would be the measure you'd be hoping to see the most change on through treatment. And in this manner, you can see how you can configure the system really client by client, measure by measure, to reflect exactly what's going on for that client and to be able to report on it. But at the same time, knowing that for any given client, very simply by going to charts, you can see what's going on for the client. This is an earlier case, so it's not demonstrating much. But if we go back to our risk demo here, you can see that you're getting the primary measure here. Now, I'll just show you by quickly adding another session. You can see down here that you can choose to turn off or on measures as well in the particular session that you may not want to use. And for example, in this second session, if you just want to monitor risk, you can turn everything else off. Perhaps you want to leave problems on. And then we can create that session. It's attended. Let's go straight to the problem list and see how things are going here. Well, you can see the scoring. This is a separate section now that is just to do with problems, and you can see that things aren't changing very much. You might want to look at the individual, and you can see the chart for that individual, and again there's been a small improvement here, so that color changes. And if we go back now to the session list and go into this session again, we can move on down. Now remember, I said that you can put a total score in, or you can put the individual items in. So let's say this is coming now down a little bit, but there's still a considerable degree of risk. Just scoring the individual items here. So it's now coming down a little bit. That's the risk scored. The problems, you need to score the problems individually because they have to be checked in with. So the fear of the partner is perhaps coming down a little bit, and sleep is improving. So we can now close this, and if we now look here, we can see the risk score is coming down now. So there's been a considerable improvement in the risk score. And if we go to the charts now, we can see that there is an improvement in the risk, but of course the risk is now improved by in excess of 25%. But of course, with training of the practitioners, this is because this system is configured that any measure that improves by 25% or more will color green. However, one can bring through training attention to the fact that obviously the risk is still very high for this client. But because the system is configured in this way, it will give that sort of signal. But then you can look at the individual score and you can see that while it's coming down, it's still well above the cutoff for that case. So this gives you an idea then about how you can use your primary measure choice, as Tony was explaining the other night, to have the risk right on the front page for that particular case. And of course, it could be the case that's in your configuration. It may be the case that you would want to have the risk giving a different color flag to the other measures. And this would be an item that would be part of your setup adjustment, if you like, that would be necessary to show the changes that were taking place. So I hope that makes some sense to you and gives you an idea of the flexibility of the system. Thank you very much.